it has to be that missional focus. Why do we exist, and not the institutional preservation? That's not a good reason to exist. It is the why. It is the compelling, the love of God that has reached us, that calls us to reach others, that is the gift to this world that the world needs and doesn't even know it needs.
Welcome to the More Than Sunday podcast. I'm your host, Rohini Drake, and in this season called What the Tech, we've been exploring the intersection of faith and technology and what it looks like to retain our humanity in the midst of an increasingly digital world. In this final episode of the season, we're exploring the future of faith and what lessons we might be learning from Gen Z and Gen Alpha. We'll hear again from the Reverend Rachel Gilmore. And to start the conversation, I asked Dr. Tamice Spencer-Helms, who is a teacher, theologian, and creator and host of the Black Modern Mystic podcast, what they think is driving young people to online spaces to explore their faith.
I have been thinking about that. I think one question that I ask is, why do the young people go there? What are the places that are not trying to get them, but that they naturally, of their own volition, want to go? And usually those spaces are authentic. They tell the truth. They're expansive, but they also invite questions and change. And so I think if institutions or churches are thinking about how to keep young people, I think it behooves them to kind of dig into those questions of meaning making and how do we adapt to change and how expansive can we be with our language. I think that's where young people feel drawn, and where they feel safe is where they can stretch out a little bit and change their minds.
So what do you think that we can learn from this observation that young people are craving these authentic spaces and they're finding them more and more online? But what, as a church, can we kind of take from that observation and do something with it?
I think asking what authenticity means, for one thing, and ensuring that we as a church are living that out ourselves. So it's really easy to stand up as a preacher on Sunday, as somebody with some level of authority in a space, and try to act like I have it all together. And that is a very tempting thing to do most of the time. But authenticity means that, yes, I've been set apart by ministry, answering a call to ministry, but I also am still figuring out who God is. I am still figuring out what life is and what it looks like. And so I think authentic spaces are ensuring that we are just being real about a lot of different things. And I think that United Methodism is pretty uniquely suited for that. We are a church that has always encouraged you to think deeply. We are a church that has always encouraged you to bring questions and name your doubts. And sometimes it's really hard to live that out, but it's who we want to be. And so I hope that we're creating those spaces in person, online, in any way we can, where people can be who they are.
Yeah, I think don't try to be something you're not. And I think sometimes churches, in an effort to draw young people into the church, it's like, let's try to be a cool church, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. It's like, be who you are, be real, be what you are. And I do like that we are a church that where people can bring questions, and we don't always have the answers. And it's important for us to be able to say, this is where I am, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know that that's for everybody, but this is where I am on this. And I think that is real. And I just had, with our youth pastor, just had a wonderful conversation with one of our youth. We're talking about God and science, and talking about what happens to people of other faiths. Do they go to heaven? And all these questions that this young person had that were wonderful, legitimate, authentic questions. And I feel like we had real authentic conversation around that. We're not trying to say whatever would attract that young person into our church. We're just trying to be real and say, this is what we believe, and this is where we are. And acknowledging that questions are good. that we have questions too, and we're still asking and trying to grow in our faith.
No, I think that's very true. And as I walk around the church, and I have 2 teenagers that are part of a part of youth ministry, and I don't think that they would come unless they felt like they could find authentic spaces or have the permission to build authentic spaces for them and their friends. And I think FUMCR does a really good job of not gatekeeping and saying, no, this is the way, the only way. There's so much openness for our young people, I think, to be owners of their faith here and owners of that process going forward of learning how to grow in their faith. But I do know that that's not necessarily the story everywhere. And so I asked Rachel to give us her perspective on what she's kind of seen denominationally and around the country. And this is what she had to say.
Yeah, a better question than how do we get the young people here is why did they leave in the first place? And are we willing to sacrifice what has to be done to get them back? Every church says we want young adults, we want young families, young professionals, teenagers, but they don't want to make the changes necessary to create a safe intergenerational space for that to happen. So it's tough. Change is hard, and it's really hard for churches that haven't done the work of grieving that the glory days of church that they remember from the 60s, 70s, even 80s, 90s seeker movement, they're gone. And what drew them to church decades ago will not work anymore. So they have to start from a posture of humility and listening and learning, and that can be really hard for an established church to do as well.
So I feel like that's a tough reflection or a tough comment to hear. What do you think about that? Do you think it's hard for traditional churches to kind of make some switches or movements?
Yes. And it's worth the cost.
Mm.
I came to FUMCR about 3.5 years ago and was so lucky that there was this established culture. I preach in our modern service most Sundays, and there was this established culture that if we want kids to be in this worship space is going to be noisy, and there will probably be crumbs from snacks because you're not going to survive a full worship service with a toddler if you don't have snacks. And the sermon might get interrupted by, literally 2 weeks ago, a kid saying, "I'm hungry," which was a cue for me to wrap it up, Pastor, because we all need to get to lunch. That's the reality. And I think one of the hardest things is to back up from that question of we want young people in the church and interrogate ourselves of, are you saying that because you are afraid that the institution you are a part of is going to die? And so you want young people to come in here as a vehicle of preservation of this community that you're in, that you care about deeply? Or are we saying that we as a church community have something of value for the world, and the thing that we have is the message that God loves you, that there is a God who has created you, who has sustained you through your life, even if you didn't know who that God was, and there is a God who is calling you to build a place where the hungry are fed and the naked are clothed and the lonely are found. If we are saying that that is what we have, and we are compelled by the power of that to go out to young people, whether it's young families or whether it's young professionals who are experiencing some of the biggest changes that they will experience in their lifetime, who are asking questions of, does anyone care? Am I important? Do I have a purpose in this world? If we are compelled by the fact that there is a God who loves those people and who is trying to reach them, and we are literally the vehicle that God has chosen, the audacity of Jesus to hand the mission of the church to people like us, if that's the reason we want young people in our churches, then they will find this to be a meaningful community to be a part of. But we talked about authentic space. People know when they walk into a church, if you're like, oh, we can use you, versus we want to love you. Those are two very different motivations that will show themselves eventually. And so I think we have to do some pretty deep self-examination before we ever get into, well, what if we have a helicopter Easter egg drop? Will that get will that get young people in the door? Like, that's not the point. The point is God loves them, so we need to go love them exactly where they are and engage them in that way.
You nailed that. That was awesome. And I just was in a conversation with someone who he was telling me about how his church is, they're not reaching young people and they're dying. And then in the same conversation, he tells me, he goes, I hate having drums and guitars and worship. That's just so unworshipful to me. And having children in worship, it's so noisy, and I don't like that when a child cries in worship. And I was trying to share a different point of view that, it's a beautiful sound when a child cries in worship.
Yeah.
It's music to God's ears. And yeah, how we worship God is different for different people in terms of musical styles and things, but we're worshiping God. And if you're at a church where you can worship God and you're reaching all generations of people for the right reasons, because you're trying to share the love of Christ with as many people as you can, and you want people, you've been so impacted by that love personally that you want others to know that love. You want others to experience that kind of grace that is so life-changing. Then absolutely we will do what it takes to open ourselves to new expressions and to the leadership of young people. I think that's something really important because young people can lead, children can lead, and they do lead.
They're not the future of the church.
They are the church. So how can we empower them to lead and maybe take the church in directions that it may make us cranky. They changed the music, or they that kid's crying in church, but we're reaching people. And I think it has to be that missional focus. Why do we exist, and not the institutional preservation? That's not a good reason to exist. It is the why. It is the compelling, the love of God that has reached us, that calls us to reach others, that is the gift to this world that the world needs and doesn't even know it needs, but is the healing of the world that is possible.
Yeah, I mean, the ultimate realization of a Christian is to realize it is not about me. I'll give an example. I have a very clear preference when it comes to communion. Communion is one of the most important practices for us as a church. We engage with it online. It is a gift of grace from God. And the best and most preferable way that I receive communion is if it is a King's Hawaiian loaf.
Yes.
And Welch's grape juice. That is what I grew up
Amen.
on. That is what I want. It is, in my opinion, the best combination. And every time we engage with communion at FUMCR, we use crackers that are as allergen-free as we can make them. And it is not my favorite food. It's not my favorite way to have communion. And then when someone comes to me and says, because they have celiac, this is the first church where I have been able to receive communion with my family instead of going to a separate communion station by myself without my family that I attend with, without my kids, without my spouse, whatever it is, because I'm the special one that needs the considerations. I'll give up King's Hawaiian bread for that. I will give up my preference of that kind of bread. And also, I can just go buy some. I can eat King's Hawaiian bread at my house on my own, when I worship online. That's what I can buy so that I have communion elements in my home ready to go. But it's frankly, it's not about me. It's just not. And we think about the ways that Jesus met people. He had 5,000 people who are all hungry, and he feeds them with the loaves and the fishes, and then he teaches. Do we think that was a silent gathering? People are eating. There's people of all ages. There's 5,000 of them in an outdoor space. Do we think that was, they all sat perfectly still and quietly and listened to Jesus? No, it was chaotic and noisy and messy, and there were crumbs, and people found God. That's how God has always worked.
Yeah, that preference often takes the place of purpose, and we always have to get back to purpose. And you nailed that in terms of, you'd gladly give that up, your preference, to accomplish the purpose.
I think you both nailed it. Is in everything that you've said, I can attest to that's the spirit I think of when I think of FUMCR, that we are willing to set aside our preference because the core mission, like what we are all rowing towards in the same direction, is sharing the love of God with our community, with people that encounter us in person, or if they encounter us online, that we hold authenticity and truth as one of those things that are most important to us. And I think people feel that, again, whether they walk through our doors or if they encounter us online. And I think that's something to celebrate, and something that definitely gives me hope that for our young people, for the future of the church to come and the church that is right now, it's very hopeful. So thank you both for sharing this time with us and walking with us through this What the Tech series, and look forward to what comes next.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode. If you want to learn more about the guests that we had on this episode, you can visit FUMCR.com/morethansunday. There you can also find any other episodes you may have missed. Thanks again for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful week.